thank you all for coming. Obviously, if you're here, you've got an interest in AI and what it may mean for you, both from a personal point of view, but also from a business point of view. We've got Jonathan and Samantha in the chat room asking questions and interacting with all of you. So please feel free, if you've got any questions, to jump in there and type them up, and we'll. I'm sure if we can't answer, then we'll try and address them at the end. Our guest speaker today is Anant Bali. Anant's he's worked with several Fortune 500 multinationals for the past 2 decades. And he's an entrepreneur, award-winning author, global speaker, futurist, and highly sought-after thought leader. He's creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship, and transformation specialist. So he's helping us here today with this discussion about AI, because it's something that's, we think, from not even from a technical point of view, but just from a business point of view or as a leader, something that you need to be considering in your strategy in the future. So in the very near future, I should say. So with that having been said, let's get started with our little presentation here. Let me give you some context on what we're hoping to do. Essentially, at the end of this, I'm hoping that everyone here will be able to walk away and say, I know what to do, have an understanding of resistance or apprehension to change with AI, and remain competitive in the market. So you hopefully you'll get what you need and understand what you don't need, which is also very important. And understanding the normalizing fear of AI. That's a one that I want to talk about a little bit in a second, but it's something. There's probably a lot of myths in AI, and we'll get into that and try and dispel that before we move on to actually understanding what we can do with it. So, what is artificial intelligence? I'll throw to Anand in a second, because he's obviously going to explain this a lot better than I will. But one thing I do want to very quickly address is the fear factor of it. In movies, you'll obviously see AI as some sort of humanoid robot that takes over the world and it's hell bent on destroying mankind. Clearly, it's fiction for a reason. It's not true. It's simply not true, right? So the thing with that is, it's a tool. It's a resource. It's something else we can use to make our lives better and easier, and make us more productive. That's all it is. And it's something we need to consider in the same way that computers were that when they first came out. It's not something that we should fear. It's something we're, believe it or not, already using. In whether we know it or not, it's something we're already onto. So, and as far as the elephant in the room about putting people out of work and all that kind of stuff, I mean, a good leader should know that if you can free up time for your team, what you should be doing is spending time on developing them, and that's what's going to make you a substantially better team and stronger team, and give you a much more competitive edge in the market. So this is just about using AI to really strengthen your team as a resource, using AI as a resource or a tool, I should say, to strengthen your team. So having said that, Anand, if you wouldn't mind explaining straight from the beginning, what's artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so look, guys, typically AI, usually people have different definitions to it, but let me step back and give you a bit more journey towards how this has happened. There was a time when we were using machines, just the physical machines, whether it's a wheel-based lathe machine or any particular physical metal object, the big thing that was a machine. And we used that only to augment our physical power, right? So anything that we couldn't do physically, we couldn't lift a big stuff, or we couldn't use a big hammer, we had machines. But those machines had no brain, no thinking power, nothing that they could think of. So we used to press a button and machine would do the job. That was a dumb machine. Then came the software era, where we started to experiment with automation or software programs, right? And those programs would do much of a thinking part, but not so much And then the third situation, or the third paradigm, which is where we are seeing now, is when that thinking, so the brain power and the muscle power is getting joined together. So there was a robotics earlier, and that was just the dumb robotics. And now you've got a brain added to it, and which is where you're looking at an artificial intelligence. But it's again, there's a minor difference between what is automation and what is artificial intelligence. And people often get confused between the two only because uh, there's almost a very thin border. And the way I would put it is, if it is an automation, mostly it's hard coded. It's pretty deterministic. You know this is going to happen. These are the steps, and that's pretty much it. That's not going to think. That's not going to learn. If anything new comes up, you have to redo the whole hard coding one more time. With AI, though, the difference is the system is set up in such a way that there is a feedback loop. So whatever is the output, system learns from that output and adjusts itself for the next iteration. And that keeps going on, which it kind of mimics our intelligence, which is why the name artificial intelligence. So if you do something, first time you fail or first time you don't quite hit the mark, you will learn, and then next time you will try and adjust and do something better. And that's what the machine is trying to do now, and which is why we call it the AI. Again, clear distinction from humans and us is AI still learns from a very, very narrow field of work. So most of the AIs are classified as narrow AIs. So that's the difference. So if you hear a term like RPA, automation, robotics, AI, they're all different. They're all different, and there's a minor overlap within them. That's the key to it.
That's good. That's right. That's good, and that is a key distinction. That there is, point that you touched on there. There are boundaries and limitations to AI, which is it can only work on the data that we input to it. So
Right.
It's not something that we will ever really exceed what we're doing to a certain extent, because it will always work in the boundaries that we give it. So it's an important point. Now, based on that, and obviously on sort of moving on with that, I know you sort of mentioned automation. There can be a bad reputation sometimes for people if they go to some sort of automation, even if it's AI driven. Would you be able to touch a little bit on how people will deal or can deal with that?
So when you say a bad rep, what are we referring to clearly? Is that
it just generally because of the stigma involved with getting automation or robots or machines, or even if it's software packages,
All right. So there are a couple of stigmas around it, a couple of issues why people kind of fear that is, and it's not just the fear of losing jobs or redundancies, etc. That's there, and we're not denying that piece, but probably that sits at the last. Some of the clear examples where people have lost a lot of money, so they drained a lot of money in automation without getting clear results. They've lost too much money, and the results are either not there or they're there, but then they really don't stack up against the money spent. That's the primary reason. The second reason why people really scared about this is there's now a clear path to implementation, and that has been the same case with even software, right? So when there was a waterfall design model where you give your requirements to your software vendor, they come back after a year, design something, and that's not what you wanted, which is where people develop those agile and other methodologies to fix those problems. They are not yet fixed, so the problem still exists. So the key issue here is how you define problem, as in the business problem, and what gets transferred to the vendor or to the developer, and finally what they design and deliver. there's always a gap, and that gap is still that such a big gap that and it's irreversible mistake most of the times. You can change the software or a process back, but you can't really get your time back. So it's a waste of time, and that's the biggest fear that businesses have. Redundancies and all. Look, that fear is still there, and to some extent it does exist. But I would say there are answers to it, but there is no clear answer to the first big problem.
That, I think all that realistically, like any technology, doesn't even have to be artificial intelligence, any software or technology, it comes back to not the thing itself, but the way it's implemented or the change management that's required to actually make sure it's adopted well within the business and for the business.
And you see a lot of times people would do is that they just automate things. So the typical example I give is you can sing in the bathroom, but then you just buy a new music system or amplifier and you start to use it. It's not going to do any good. It doesn't make your voice sound better. If you're a lousy singer, you still are a lousy singer. Right? So the automation is just that. If you have a bad process, if you have a bad product, if your customer service sucks, if the culture is not good, if you don't treat your customers the way they should, automation is just going to amplify it. You got 10 complaints earlier, now you'll start getting 10,000 complaints. Just automate it. So and then people say, oh, this is the problem is bigger, but there was a problem even earlier, right? You just amplified it.
Yeah, which may be a good thing because you may not have been aware of the problem until you implemented it, and now
it's out of control.
Yeah, there's always a silver lining, right? So, well, thank you for that, Anant. So, what we can maybe go into now is the actual user cases. And how AI is already something that we're using. If you may not have figured that out yet, but more importantly, how you can use that yourself, whether it's for your business or for your team. So, obviously there's the three that we wanted to specifically talk about is the ones shown there: chatbot, recommendation engine, and customized. And if you wouldn't mind just explaining a little bit more detail, I guess what each one of them is and how it benefits a business and what we do.
So these three use cases are specifically of an increasing difficulty, or you could say increasing level of automation. And there are different ways these are implemented. So chatbot is something you can get out of the box solution. Say for a banking or a telecommunications or a software industry. So there are chatbots, and then all they need is a previous data. Then your type of problem, type of queries you receive, and kind of answers you give to those queries. And all this data goes into the chatbots, and then chatbot starts to function. And based on what combinations you have given, the chatbot would answer to your customers. So it's that straightforward. So it's probably the simplistic example of AI. And some of the AI, some of the chatbots do have a learning mechanism where, based on say customers ask a question and you throw an answer to it, and customers still confused or they have a different line of communications onwards, then chatbot learns from it. So they keep updating their answers bank, so to speak. So that's the chatbot. It's probably the easiest one to implement for most organizations, and easiest is a relative term again. It's not cheap by that standard. A recommendation engine is something where a lot of learning can happen. So the key distinction between AI and automation is the ability to learn from the output. So there's a feedback loop which can let the system learn with or without human supervision. So recommendation engine is something like that. And we must have seen it with, say, Amazon or any other shopping systems that we use. If you keep on buying certain kinds of things, you will see that the system keeps recommending you the same or similar alternatives. right? So you go and check for, say, Huggies diapers, and suddenly you start seeing other recommendations, diapers but different brands, different price points, etc. So that's where this recommendation engine starts to work. Same way, if you search for, say, book or particular laptop, particular system, and suddenly they start to pop up all over your browsing channels. So that's the recommendation engine. The customized one is very, very, I would say it's 100% customized. Is the whole application, right from why we are using this to how this is going to be used, how this will be built, designed, developed, and learn. How will you make it learn? That's all customized. I'll give you one example, a recent example I came across, and people are still talking about it. It's not finally implemented. Is they say that the way you speak, if you're using, say, audio system or voice-based search system or voice-based a purchasing system, your language, your tone, and your speaking style changes as you're closer to the purchase. So if you are, say, talking to Alexa, for instance, and you say, "Hey Alexa, I want to just tell me about, say, which are the good restaurants in the city who serve sushi," or something like that. Versus now you're ready to actually go and book a restaurant. Your language will change, your tone will change. And so some of the ontologists will build that system based on your tonality, based on the language, the choice of words. And then it might give someone a system that learns from you and decides whether you're closer to the purchase. And based on that, it will, say, give you an offer or maybe pass it on to a concierge to kind of complete that sale as soon as possible. So you're a hot lead in that case. So those are very customized examples, pretty niche in that sense. And most of such projects do take a long time to build, develop, and even test whether they are working or not.
And in a real world scenario, and the chatbots, I mean, I was having a little read there of some of the chat that's going on the side here. Obviously, everyone seems to have experienced a little bit of a chatbot. And if you're not sure what a chatbot is, it's if you've been at any website where you get that little pop up saying, "Do you have a question, or is there a way I can help you?" Yeah. Quite often, it's not always. Sometimes it really is a person, but quite often it'll be a chatbot. That's there to effectively help answer any questions you have. Very effective and a quick way to get people, I think, not to mention any specific brands, but a particular website that sells a lot of electrical goods online has one of those. And, literally, it's just an easier way to find things without having to really scroll through pages and pages.
You could also think it more like a glorified version of IVR, so to speak. So if you're calling a bank to just check your balance, you could do the same thing going online and say, "Hi." The moment you say hi, the bot says, "Okay, what do you want to do?" And if your sentence contains balance, then it's going to throw you a few options. Do you want to check your balance? Do you want to do something else related to balance? And the idea is basically all those repetitive questions that keep coming in, at least you're not having your human concierge or contact center executives to spend time on those repetitive questions. It's more like a self-serving system, and you put that in between the humans and the customers.
And also with the recommendation engine, you said something that sparked something, a thought of mine, which is it's not just, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not just the data it gets from things that you purchase or things that you click on. It's also things, I had the conversation with Samantha actually the other day where her daughter does which from the Harry Potter books, which house are you in, the Gryffindor or whatever it is, and that's actually a way of personality profiling.
Yeah.
So when people do this, and then they can sort of see, oh, look, other people that are doing that also are interested in this. So then you start getting ads for that. So it's very good from a business point of view, or from a marketing point of view. If you want to target introverts who happen to like X, game on PlayStations or whatever, it's very easy for your Facebook or Instagram or everyone to be able to find those people because of that data that's being inputted, I should say. And the customized thing as well. Also, to mention, I've heard, I don't know if anyone's seen this, but there was, I think about a year ago, Google came out, their big show that they do every year, and they actually showed off a new feature of Google Assistant, which was someone making a phone call to a business, like a hairdresser, and making an appointment. And the entire conversation was with Google AI. There was no real person on the other end. You wouldn't know that because it sounded like a person, and it allowed you to make a booking. More importantly, from the business point of view, it meant that they didn't have to have someone sitting there at a desk answering a phone every time it rang. They could use AI to do that while they were busy doing other things like actually cutting hair and making money. Right? So it's all this stuff, again, very useful tools for a team. So thank you, Anand. Moving on now to something that you brought up the other day, which I think was absolutely fascinating, which is how do you make a meaningful choice between tech and people? And you've kindly provided this little graph here, which I'll let you run through, explaining how you make the choice.
Yeah. Look, this is always a question that people, and we know that people choose the path of least resistance. So the moment you say, okay, we want to do automation, you want to do AI, the first, and this is the classic scene I've seen repeatedly, is most of the time the first solution people adopt is a chatbot. Whether it's relevant, not relevant, no, the chatbot is the first thing to go if you want to implement AI in your company. Maybe that's the low cost or low risk solution if you're looking at that way. But clearly, if you're seriously thinking about implementing artificial intelligence or any kind of automation, you shouldn't be thinking it from which technology I can use or which tech is good, which vendor is good, and all that. I think if we come from customer point of view, that why my business exists, what am I here to provide customers, and where is my bottleneck, right? And based on the bottleneck, based on the value that you provide to your customers, then you see where I need the most help. And then you make a choice. So this is more of a choice framework that I've put up here. Typically, you will find that when there is a high value to be delivered to your customers or to your internal customers, and you have to do it at a large scale, because it's common that if someone individually tries to do it, it's not humanly possible sometimes to do it at a large scale. The quality degrades, the performance degrades, so that we know. So if you want to do something at a high value, and or say it's highly valuable for a business and for the customer, and you don't want to compromise on quality, AI is a better choice, which is where you see it's in the top quadrant. So that's there. Now, the top left one. So number one choice is always a people, because no AI can replace human intelligence. That's kind of, I work in AI and still I say that it's not, no matter how good AI becomes, it's not going to replace human intelligence, at least. So if you see that it's a low volume product, if your service is not highly oversubscribed, or you don't have too much volume to deal with, and your product is high touch or highly valuable, you really don't need AI. You absolutely don't need AI to use. So your people can do the good job. But if you see that people are getting frustrated just because it's too much work to deal with, and it's all high value, then goes to the second part, that's AI. but not all work needs AI. So if it is the low value work, like mundane jobs, repetitive tasks, fairly simple work, and doesn't really add a high value. So that there comes the low value part, but it's a high volume. So for instance, accounting has to be done every day or every week, so like a bookkeeping, but it's not really the value adding for customers. They don't care whether you do accounting or not, unless you are an accountant. They just care about the service and product. So that's where you can use automation. That's where you can optimize your process and try to push it into one of the other quadrants. So whether you can make it high value by weeding out unnecessary things, so that low value part becomes high value. But if you can't, then obviously the volume has to be reduced. So you either get rid of those things, or if you have to keep doing those things, then you optimize, you automate those things. Fair simple RPAs or simple softwares fit into that category. Well, fourth part is self-explanatory. If it is low volume, low value, why are we even doing it? So that's clear choice that you may not, and most of the businesses don't do that, right? So that's that. I haven't seen a business which fits in the quadrant 4, but most of our activities fit in 1, 2, and 3. So if you have to put your bet, if you want to put your money on any kind of an AI system, try and see to do it only for high value, high volume tasks. Otherwise, it's just a waste of money.
No, and I have found this absolutely fascinating because I actually, if you look at it, you can actually apply this across a lot of things, not just what tasks or things you do in your business, just generally as your day-to-day tasks that you do, you're always making a choice. And this actually applies. Now, obviously AI in this, if you're just talking about the various choices you're making, doesn't fit in there. But how many people do you know who they might be doing something and they get stuck in something that's low volume and low value in what their job actually entails, and as leaders, again, you see that, there's always someone in the team who gets bogged down in something that's, they get tunnel vision on something that's really low volume and low value. So why are they doing it, and so it's important, this quadrant in general, I think, because it does give you an ability to sit there and look at what you do and go, okay, actually, things I thought were important, maybe not so much, and the things that are important, I should be doing with AI. So I think it's something definitely worth looking at. And I think, pardon me, I've had a frog in my throat the whole time. From a real world perspective, I can speak to some experience in that. I've got, I came previously from an audiovisual background, audiovisual industry, and we had engineers, very smart guys, who would take entire different components and wire them together to make a holistic, unified system that works in harmony. The problem with that was not the intelligence they needed to do that. Obviously, they were very smart, capable. The problem was they had to spend hours and hours drawing the electrical schematics in CAD, basically, to put that all together. We got onto a software program that had AI leveraged off of Microsoft's AI, which, if you listed the components, would actually draw the entire system for you with a recommended electrical schematic. And then that freed up our engineers to actually spend their time to make sure that the system was functioning and change anything that was required. So they still used their knowledge, but we just took away the task, the time-draining task. And as a consequence of that, every system that we solved or that went out was infallible, as opposed to engineers constantly scrambling to get things done. What we found was, making mistakes because they didn't have enough time. What we found was the quality that was going up was substantially better. So, and this is a perfect example of that. So,
and I might add, there's one classic way to kind of identify if you're confused as to if a business says, okay, I don't know exactly where to fit my which task to fit where. The thumb rule is you go and ask your people what are they struggling with. They want to do it, but they're struggling. So, like, I want to make a design. If I'm a design engineer, I want to make a design. That's what I love. That's what my skill set is. But these are the things that really struggle me. They trouble me. I don't like these smaller things, which means it's a high value, but your people are struggling to do it. So you can then put up in one of those top quadrants. But if people say that, why are we even doing it? Right? If it is a complaint, or if it is something really mundane that nobody wants to do it, but it has to be done. Documentation is like a classic example in software that nobody wants to do the documentation. They understand it is necessary. It's a necessary evil, but nobody wants to do it. They will always delegate. That's the quadrant 3 task. It has to be done, but nobody wants to do it. So it's a low value from that perspective. So most of the documentation now is automated. Systems generate that.
And that leads us nicely into this next slide here about the levels of AI, which plays very nicely into figuring out exactly, depending on that feedback you get from people, on what is actually a sore spot with them or a difficult point for them. Then you can determine from that what level of AI you require, which Anand, if you could take us through, we decided to talk about three main levels. If you could go through that quickly so we can have everyone understand how each one works.
So first, level 1 is typically you're using very little automation or very little augmentation of your efforts. So much like, say, in industrial terms, there are lots of jobs where humans cannot pick a big hammer, right? That's obvious. You're not physically fit to do that. So they use machines to punch the big stuff. So like 10 tons, 20 tons machine just to punch it. So they're not replacing the entire job. They're just replacing that small task, which they can't do. Same goes here. If you're saying we use calculators, for instance, the calculator is probably the simplest example. If you're seeing that you're doing an accounting, you're working on a balance sheet, which is high value for you, but you want to do it faster, then you would use calculator or Excel or something. So you are using a system only for parts of your job. That's level 1. The same way you can also use, say, chatbots or automated systems. And a lot of contact center people, most of the times you'll see that, let me check with the system, and they will run some of the tests to get the results out rather than they doing themselves. Those are level 1 systems where human involvement is much higher, and they use systems in between of those tasks. Level 2 task is where probably there's no clear distinction here, but more of a 50-50, where you are delegating tasks. So you're breaking your task into humans that will do that task, and the machine will do that task, or system will do that task. Automated batch runs or automated systems. Chatbots also usually fit in that category. So the first level of support is given by chatbot. And if a chatbot somehow doesn't answer that question, or your customer wants to talk to human, then it will escalate it to the human responder. So that's a level 2 where you're distinguishing 2 tasks, and they are separate. So this is what machine will do, this is what you will do, and they fit into your process as well. Third part is, I would say, it's mostly what AI can do as a whole process, or one big chunk of your work, or of the jobs to be done. And that's where I think the whole autonomous piece comes in. It's far away for most of the organization as of now, where the entire process can be automated. I'll give you a simple example which happened. So we did this similar project in a telco, Australian telco, and there was a process called incident management. So typically, if you call in and say that my internet is down or I'm getting drops, I'm not getting enough bandwidth or speed, what happens afterwards is that process, incident management process. So what they would do initially, it was totally level one automation. So they would get your call, ask you a few questions. They will say, okay, this light, whether this LED is on, this is green, this is red, blah, blah, blah. And once you answer, they will run a few tests. And based on those tests, they will then decide whether they need to reset, reswitch, or send someone, do something. So it was pretty mixed. They would use certain automation tools to do those tests, and then the human would take the final call. Then we changed it to a level 2 system, where the moment you call, lodge your call, and answer most of your questions, the whole incident will go through automated system. An automated system will do exactly those checks that a human will do. And after that checks, if automated system reasonably decides, so there comes in AI, mostly it's a probability. Okay, it's not hard line answer yes or no. It's highly probable that you have X type of a problem, then AI will try to fix it. If it can't, then it will give it out and delegate it to the person and say that, okay, it's not automatically doable. So you take a closer look at it, and then the human will look at it. And the third part is where they really struggle and it kind of fail, is they tried to remove that last part as well. So they created two AIs, you could say less intelligent AI and more intelligent AI. The first thing, it will go the way it was. And the second AI would mimic what human was doing, further testing. So, and very few times they found a success that you make a call, you make a complaint, system goes through automatically end to end and it fixes the problem. Rare occurrence, but that's the level 3 example.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I think we mentioned at the beginning, we're already using AI day to day, even if we don't know. And I think from a business point of view, if you're thinking about AI now because your competitors are already using it, you're already way too late. You need to be moving faster, because the reality is it takes time, like anything, to implement. And so if your goal is to be just to keep up with your competitor, I think Dave has said this before. If you're trying to keep up with your competitor, you're already 3 steps behind, right? So the reality is, if that's something that you're looking into, I'm not saying dive into it head first. Obviously, the point of this webinar is to figure out exactly what level you need, because a chatbot might be all you need. You might not need anything more. You might just need a very rudimentary robotic automation system. But either way, the point is, figure out what you need now, because realistically, if you want to be in full swing with AI in 3 years or 4 years, you need to start now, because your competition may have already started. So thank you for that. That's excellent. Let's move on to sort of simplifying the complex and demystifying a few things. So just to recap, look for the small wins, which is sort of linked to the last point there, in that find something that you've asked around, as Anant had said, to your team and said, all right, where are your pain points? What can we do to make things better? They're the small wins. Find those small things. It'll help with the people in your team, with culture, with efficiency, and again, it will strengthen that team. So I think those are the little things you need to do. In order to pick the right thing, you need to have a clear outcome. So make sure the end goal is in sight. Don't just get it for the sake of getting it. Understand what you're trying to achieve. and that'll help you determine what you need to get in or start with, or where to look. The money drain that you mentioned, and again, there's a lot of things out there where you purchase something and you could buy an add-on for this or this, get a subscription for that, or whatever it might be.
I might want to add on that. Is regarding the money drain, and that's seriously a big sucker, because we tend to think that people, especially AI vendors, do understand what they are dealing with or do understand their product per se. Well, to technical extent they do, but they don't understand really how this whole ecosystem is going to work, because now it's not that one box product. That product has to deal with all your other systems in your business, which may or may not be owned by the same vendor. So they're dealing with other vendor systems. They're also dealing with the real life problems. So it's pretty complex compared to earlier, like in the CD software. So you put the CD install and it's done. It's not that simple anymore. So I think the best way to deal with these vendors is with skepticism. Guaranteed, they do not understand completely, even if they say that we know we have been doing it. Every single customer is different. Even if someone has successfully delivered a chatbot or any solution with your competitor or someone in your industry, it may not be successful with you, right? Despite being the same business, because every business has got very, very unique conditions and scenarios. And that's where I think most of the people lose money, because most of these software projects usually go on a time and material basis. And when things don't go the way you want, the clock keeps running, you keep paying by the meter. And so that's where you can't pull out. And there comes a time where the endowment effect kicks in, that you're so deep in, you can't even pull out, or you don't want to pull out. So it's a very tricky situation. So either one way to deal with that is picking up a clear outcome, shorter sprints rather than a big long project, and having some level of accountability on the vendor side as well.
Yeah, agreed, very much so. And which actually, again, leads perfectly to that next point, which is set the defined boundaries for the project as well. So the short sprints, if you know what your boundaries are, short sprints are easy, because you know exactly what you're trying to achieve, and you can section that into small chunks and then do those short sprints. Obviously, that with the low risk, low cost stepping stone, it's something that it kind of leads into almost an agile methodology of project management, or Scrum, or that kind of thing. So, it's over and above project management. It's applicable generally in terms of just applying this solution or this tool or resource to your team or business. What I did want to move on to is more specifically moving forward, to try and make some general points for everyone here, so we can all go away a little bit better off knowing what we now know about AI and how we're going to implement it. I did want to talk about very quickly. I do want to reiterate this because it's a conversation that Anand and I have had before. It's very much, AI is very much about replacing the task, not the person. Okay, it's very much so, and the better we can do that, or the more we can do it, the better we're going to have, the stronger team we're going to have. I will say, in today's world, there's nothing it's very rare that something you sell, whether it's a product or content, is unique. There's always someone else, a competitor, who's selling something similar. The point of difference is service. It's your service. It's how you interact with people. Now, if you can take some of the tasks away from your staff so they can spend more time or team to spend more time speaking to customers or clients and ensuring that they get a better service. That's the ultimate goal. That's what you're trying to achieve. So that's the whole point of this webinar, is to try to explain that something like this is a necessary tool in order to ensure that you actually deliver a really good service to your clients and your customers. So moving forward with that, where is the resistance apprehension? I hope we've addressed some fears and apprehensions that anyone may have had or heard or thought potentially about AI. What is the scope that will be required? So think about what you actually want it to achieve if you are going to implement it, and make the appropriate moves that way. And obviously, what kind of AI will be suited. In that quadrant, and we had a few slides back. If anyone wants a copy of that, obviously, just let us know in the chat. We'll happily pass that on so you can reference for your own sake. Having said that, I think we can probably get to the end here. And before I throw to everyone to see if there's any more questions, I see the chat room has been very busy, which is excellent. Is there anything you would like to add for people that might be considering implementing AI?
Yeah, so look, there's a lot to say about AI, but if I have to summarize in terms of the business, people, processes, customers, and AI is the last. Your customer is the first, your people is the second, your business is third, and AI is last. If you put this into perspective, if you keep it in priority like this, I think there's no fear. Fear comes from unknown. Once you know your priorities very well, there's no need to fear, or there's no need to worry about.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And again, like as we've mentioned before, if at the end of the day you're looking after your people by helping them with some of the pains that they brought up, whether that's AI or not, at the end of the day, that's what's going to help you and help you and your team. So if anyone has any questions that they'd like that they haven't already asked in the chat room, or they would like Anand or myself to cover, I'll give you a couple of seconds if you want to post anything in there. Otherwise, you can contact us via email afterwards, and we'll happily get back to you.
John, there was a really good one here from Olga. Stated that there can be a lot of resistance in handing off high volume and high value tasks to a robot, given up control is really hard. Can someone encourage decision makers to explore these new tools? I know we talk a lot about open, transparent communication. We also talk about return on investment and understanding the total cost of ownership for these tools. Is it possible for Anand to just, I know in his position as an AI subject matter expert, he's encountered a lot of resistance at the strategic level. Is he able to comment on this question? Because I think it's a very good one.
Yeah, this is a very, very common issue, whether it's a transformation change or even tech, for instance, that I know I'm suffering, I know there's a struggle, but I don't want to give up, because the moment I give up, probably I might lose something. And that's what prevents people from handing over this to robot or automate it. No matter what, like they're struggling. You can see that they're spending a lot of time wasting their time, and they understand it, and still they don't want to do it. So the question we have often asked is, what is in it for them? Like, what if it's not? We know there is a struggle. So if they do it, their struggle will go away. But that's not the driver. I think the driver is, the moment struggle goes away, then what happens next, right? And so one of the things we typically say is, even with the analysts, so I remember one of the project I implemented last year, 2 years ago. We were automating a kind of a report that otherwise used to take 3 days. and it's not a pure AI, it's just the automation. So high volume, kind of a middle value task. And people were resistant to do that because they felt they were adding some real value, right, to the business by providing those insights, those things, etc. But so we had to go down that path asking, what exactly are you trying to provide as an employee, as an individual? And what part this automation is going to take away from you? The moment we realize that it is the insight what they're more concerned about, not the Excel sheet and macros and number of things. It's the insight. So having seat at the table of that executive meeting, if that is what their aspiration is, we maintain that aspiration. We told them that the moment you clear the path to implement this automation, you will get more time to explain your insights to the top team, which means you get a seat at the table, which means you get to highlight your core skills, not those Excel skills anymore. I think it cleared a lot of air, because now they have something to add as a value. So it's not, so I often say that losing the task, losing a job is not the problem. Problem is what happens after that. And do I like what is going to happen after that? If the future is bright, if the replacement is better than this, you don't even have to push for the change. People will just let go of it, right? I mean, like if I ask you, give me your current iPhone, you probably won't give it until you see a new, better iPhone.
Exactly, and this is exactly right. And I think again, it all leads back to that same thing, which is if you can, the time, cost, quality triangle is something I'm very fond of. And time, I think for most people, is the most precious part of that triangle. So if you can show people that they can free up some time, it allows them to focus more on the quality, and cost of things, which from a team leader point of view is the best thing you can do. Because if you can actually invest time in your team by upskilling them or by mentoring them or whatever it is, because you freed up some time, then ultimately that's the goal. Okay. So I think we might be running out of time here, so we might have to wrap it up. I thank everyone for joining this webinar, and I want to congratulate you for joining it, because simply by being interested in this, it shows that you already have an interest in the people and in your team and your business, and are aware that this is something that can be used as a tool. So I'd say you're already ahead of the curve just by being interested in it. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to if anything comes up after that you think of, feel free to email any of us. We'll happily oblige. But other than that, thank you very much. Have a good day. We'll see you all soon.
Thank you, everyone.